No.
I don't what? Oh,
I have a furry creature who's
one of the kitties wants to be a part of.
wanting my time here.
I don't what? I had two doggies that followed me into my office too, so I just hope they don't bark during the show.
Furry creature who's
One of the kitties wants to be a part of.
wanting my time here.
No what?
So we are live, waiting for some people to come in.
Oh,
I have a furry creature who's
one of the kitties wants to be a part of.
So we've got 15 people online. Hello, everybody. It is 3 p.m., my friend. We are about ready to rock and roll.
Let's do it.
Don't have a lot. We've only got 18 people, so let's give it a couple more minutes and let some more filter in. How was your class in Fallbrook?
Large, loud, and lots of questions. That's my biggest class. They topped over 50 last week.
Say again.
They were over 50 last week. I didn't count this week, but it looked like it was about the same. Definitely my biggest class, and very enthusiastic group. And it's at a church, and so the pastor hangs out too. And it's awesome when a pastor walks up to you and says, "I'm learning so much from you."
Exactly. That has to be gratifying. I've in my time, just being around the events that I did with Scott, around Southern California and Northern California, and across the country, people have come up to me and, I guess they've heard me be on Scott's show and they tell me that they appreciate me. I'm just a regular guy. This is kind of new to me. I don't really seek the light on this. I'm very passionate about the country, as you are, as Scott is. And, it's gratifying to know that the passion that I have is respected by other people out there. It's very flattering.
It is. Well, Scott McKay, and this is for you audience out there too, if they can hear me.
Yep.
But Scott McKay comes to me at the end of the third event, walks up to me and we talk a little bit, and he says, "Hey, I just want to let you know, man, you got a hell of a fan base out there, man. Like 3/4 of people come to see me, thank me for having you on." And I was like, "Oh, very cool, very cool." So I appreciate the folks out there that appreciate what I'm trying to do here. And, and it's like I tell all my classes, I can get in any conversation, but I'm all about the Constitution. So that's going to be my primary focus. But if you want to ask me other things off camera or whatever, let's talk. I'll talk about just about anything, my opinion or whatever, but just be aware that 90% of my answers are going to have some type of constitutional basis to them.
Sure. We're sitting on 45 now. I think we can get started. We're a couple minutes late, but I just wanted to let some people filter in. So
right,
let's go ahead and get her going. But by the way, did you see my shirt today?
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
When the moment that you realize the conspiracy theorists were right all along.
Well, I have a saying that yesterday's conspiracy theory is tomorrow's headline.
Exactly. How's that, Dr. Pepper?
It's probably killing me, but I'm enjoying every moment of it.
Indeed.
Well, it's good to have you guys. Anything to say, Ron, before we get started? Do you have anything?
Everybody in the chat, if you do have questions, by all means, shoot them over, and I will post them to Doug if they are pertinent to the meeting at hand.
Very good. And it's funny because Scott essentially told me, he enjoyed it when I was on the program because he got to listen rather than do a lot of talking, got a chance to kick back, kind of learn, just relax. And so, Ron, now you get to do that. Enjoy. As for you out there in the audience, good to see you, Mr. Constitution, Douglas V Gibbs, douglasvgibbs.com, politicalpistachio.com. For those of you in Southern California, I've got to say this. Patriot Streetfighters, you people are everywhere. I go to an event in Granada Hills, right? And it's the Military Order of World Wars. I'm not expecting a Patriot Streetfighter to appear there, right? And they have this actress there who, Rebecca, oh gosh, now I'm trying to remember her last name. I'll get it out there. I put it out in an email not too long ago. And she was there to sing the national anthem. And then afterwards, she walks up to me. She says, "I'm a huge fan. I watch you every week on Scott McKay." I'm like, man, there's even a Patriot Streetfighter here. And on top of it, it's a Hollywood type. She was the Breck girl, I guess, was her thing when she was in acting. And now she's much older, but she still does smaller stuff. But and I was just like, unbelievable, man. The Patriot Streetfighters are everywhere. Same thing happened in Redlands on Sunday. There was a Patriot Streetfighter there as well. So I go to these different events, and so I have to say this about the Patriot Streetfighters. First of all, you guys are awesome. Second of all, I love the fact that you're holding the fork in line like you do. And third of all, you guys are everywhere, man. It's amazing how big Scott's audience is, and I do appreciate you all. Okay. Article 5 is where we're at in our pocket constitution or online constitution or whatever you have in your hand that has the Constitution in it. Article 5, there are 7 articles from the original Constitution. Article 1, legislative branch. Article 2, executive branch. Article 3, judicial branch. Article 4, about the states. Article 5 is amendments. Article 6 is about the federal government. And then Article 7 is ratification. So we have gotten to amendments. And let me give you just a little bit of groundwork here. It's an amazing thing because the founding fathers understood that they weren't perfect and that this document may need to have some changes, some additions, some new powers, whatever. And so they gave the system, and the document, the opportunity, the ability to be amended, changed, or updated, or whatever you want to call it. And so the process, though, is very telling when it comes to who is really the final arbiters of the Constitution. Remember, I told you very early on that the states are the parents over the federal government. They're the ones that created the federal government through the convention and through this document. So the states are the parents, and they're going to have certain oversight abilities. And one of them is right here in the amendment process. In the amendment process, while Congress may propose amendments, states may propose amendments, ultimately it takes the state legislatures or a state convention to approve it. In other words, the states have to approve 3/4 of them, anything that goes in the Constitution. Now, what that means is if the federal government wants an additional authority, wants a new power, he wants to borrow the car keys and the keys to the liquor cabinet, whatever, the states, the parents, must approve it, 3/4. They have to ask the states for permission, and the states then would ratify. So that's just some basic background. Now, as we read this, there's a few other things that are going to come into play. There's also a couple of controversial things I want to discuss. I want to make sure you fully understand all of it. So hang in there, and we'll get through the entire article. It's not a long article, but it usually takes an hour because there's so many things that ties into it, so many things to discuss. So let's begin reading Article 5. And once again, if you don't have a pocket constitution and you can access one online. I have it available at douglasvgibbs.com, and then just hit the Constitution link on the far right-hand side of the page, and that'll take you to the U.S. Constitution online. So it says the Congress whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to the Constitution. So 2/3 of both houses. Notice the president's not involved here. The houses may propose amendments, but the president does not have anything to do with it. He doesn't sign it. He doesn't approve it. It's all a legislative action. So when 2/3 of both houses, in other words, of each house, so a proposed amendment, let's say, arises in the House, it goes to the Senate, 2/3 has to approve it there. Then it goes out to the states. But let's continue reading so we understand that there's actually more than one way to propose amendments. The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, on application of the legislatures, the state legislatures, if they believe they should be able to get together as states to propose amendments, they can have a convention to do so. It takes 2/3 of them to propose amendments. This is called an Article 5 convention. In modern times, there is a group around that would call it a convention of states. I'll get more into it in a minute. I know some of you may, when you hear the term convention of states, get nervous because there are a great number of people out there that are nervous about that idea, believe it could be a runaway convention, believes it's very dangerous to even think about using the convention clause for proposing amendments. We'll get into that in a minute, but understand, I believe it's a valuable tool. I don't want to burst your bubble here. I believe it's a valuable tool, but on the same token, I do understand the fears. So I'll explain all that in a minute. Let's continue reading. So, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states, or by conventions in 3/4 thereof, as the one or other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress. So that's the entire amendment process. Now let's break it down. So we got the Congress can propose amendments. 2/3 of each house has to approve it. Once it's approved, it goes out to the states, and it takes 3/4 of states to ratify that amendment. If it does not get 3/4, it does not become an amendment. It does not change the Constitution. Or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 several states. The state legislatures, once again, Congress, legislatures. It's a legislative action. The governor is not involved. The president is not involved. Application of the legislature, 2/3 of the states shall call a convention for proposing amendments. The first two words was the Congress. So that ties into this, shall call a convention for proposing amendments. So if 2/3 of the states say, hey, we want to have a convention, we've got our applications, 2/3 of us said we're going to have it, it's up to Congress to call the convention. The term call the convention means to choose a place, time, and date. That's all it means. That's aside from being able to choose the method of ratification, that's the only thing that Congress has to do with a quote unquote convention of states. What if Congress refuses to call that convention? As they have, by the way. Convention of States tells you, oh, we just need one more or two more states, we can have a convention. No. It's over 750 applications from 49 states have gone out. A convention could be called today if Congress is willing to do it, but Congress won't do it. And it says that they shall call a convention. It's not a choice, shall. It's constitutional duty that they call this convention, but they haven't. What happens if they don't? Well, now we have to ask ourselves, is holding a convention to propose amendments a right? Is it a state right? Well, in the 9th Amendment, I'll run over there real quick. It says the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. In other words, just because the federal government's not acting in an appropriate manner regarding a right doesn't mean that right cannot be acted upon or doesn't exist. It still exists, whether the federal government does its duty or not. Then at the 10th Amendment, it says that the power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, or reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. In other words, when the federal government and states don't do their job, the people can, or to the people, becomes a people thing. So since the federal government, the Congress, has not called the convention, they are violating the 9th Amendment, and based on the 10th Amendment, the people can call the convention. So the convention can happen. All right. Now, people say, yeah, but Doug, do you really want that convention? You know, we got all these corporations out there and all this money out there. Runaway convention, you know, Doug. Well, I agree that that's a possibility. But the thing is, these conventions are not for rewriting the Constitution, as some people have been told. It's not a con-con. A con-con is a constitutional convention. We only had one in 1787, and I don't want us to have another one of those where we rewrite the Constitution. This is only for the purpose of proposing amendments. They still have to be ratified. That's the fail-safe. Federalist 85 was written by Alexander Hamilton, and while I'm not a fan of him normally, he got it right on this one. In Federalist 85, he defends the Article 5 Convention, and he says exactly what I just told you, that while some people find it a danger to let the states amend the Constitution, it still takes 3/4 of states to ratify it. If they're rewriting the Constitution with this convention, and 3/4 of states are ratifying such bad amendments, then we got bigger problems than runaway conventions. That all said, now, yeah, but Doug, how is this done? How are the delegates chosen? State legislatures, while they are picking this to happen, the delegates are voted in by the people and cannot be politicians. The delegates in a convention of states cannot be office holders. So the Pelosi's of the world, the Newsoms of the world, they can't participate. And it's for the purpose of only proposing amendments. All right, then it says, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of the Constitution when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states, or by convention in 3/4 thereof. Rather than having the state legislature decide whether or not to ratify an amendment, a state can hold its own state convention. What that is it breaks up into regions. The regions choose their delegates, the people. Those delegates then attend the convention, and then they debate it, and then they vote on it and decide whether or not the state should ratify it. That's the second way. It's one or the other, but it still comes down to it takes 3/4 of states. And the states don't have to all do the same thing. One state might use the state legislature, another state might do it by convention. That's okay. It's up to the states unless Congress chooses a ratification method. The Congress can, in their call of the convention, indicate they want it to be, when it comes to ratification, all state legislatures or all conventions. They can. And they have in the past. 18th and 21st Amendments are two great examples. The 18th Amendment, the Congress called for it to be done by the state legislatures, and in the 21st, they called for it to be done by convention. So Congress can have that decision. But that's the only thing that they have to do with the amendment if it's through a convention of states, Article 5 convention. Otherwise, Congress has no say and no participation in the process. It's all about the states. Here's why I believe that an Article 5 convention is important. Because some of the greatest unconstitutional actions that have been taken in history, especially when it comes to the 16th and 17th Amendments, would require another amendment to repeal them. And I don't believe Congress would ever propose an amendment to get rid of the income tax, the IRS, or the people voting in the senators rather than the states appointing them, which is the 17th Amendment. I don't see them proposing amendments like that. I don't see them proposing but balanced budget amendments. I don't see them proposing amendments to shut down the Federal Reserve. I don't see Congress doing that. If we want those things to happen, we're going to have to do it through our states. To me, that's why Article 5 convention is important. Because if we want to get those things done, an Article 5 convention is the way to do it if we're going to use the amendment route. Now, before I go on, was there any questions in the chat at all, Mr. Ron?
None yet.
All right. Do you have any questions?
I do not.
Okay. I don't want to leave everybody out and just talk, because I tell you what, I do a class in Carlsbad on Thursday nights, and that one Zooms, and they charge for the Zoom meeting on that one. And at the very end, I have to ask them, is there any questions from the Zoomers? And we have someone who's actually in the Zoom chat room, and she'll ask the questions for the Zoomers. And it's amazing because they have a lot of questions. So, and I have no problem with questions. So if you guys have questions, don't be afraid to ask them. Okay, so we've got an amendment process. We know that the Constitution may need to be amended someday. There may have been something left out, so it should be amended. Some of those things left out might be authorities that the federal government needs to have that they didn't know about before. Something like maybe, I don't know, aviation. Aviation is an interesting one because there was never an amendment giving that authority to the federal government. So technically, the FAA is an unconstitutional agency. Now, I'm not saying that the federal government shouldn't have that authority. I think they should. But that authority is not in the Constitution. Oh, wait, Doug, it has to do with the Commerce Clause. They cross state lines is usually the response I get. That's not what the Commerce Clause means. Remember when we talked about it back in Article 1, Section 8? Commerce Clause only allows the federal government to get involved if there's a dispute between the states on stuff that's crossing state lines. If it's flowing, if commerce is flowing, no problem, then it's none of the federal government's business. It does not mean that if it crosses state lines, the federal government can grab a hold of it, tax it, and regulate it. That's not what the Commerce Clause was intended to mean. So the Commerce Clause is a bad argument when it comes to aviation. Well, Doug, then do you think they should just cease and desist? Well, yes and no. I do think that the federal government should have authority regarding aviation. After all, the planes not only travel all over the country and uses our airspace, but they go to other countries too. And so the federal government should be involved in that process, that item. All I ask is that they ask for permission to have that authority. Doesn't matter if it's obvious they should have it. I mean, it's like with my son when he was a teenager. Well, it's obvious Dad thinks I should take the car, so I'll just grab the keys. No, I still want you to ask. Even if you know the answer is going to be yes, you want to borrow the keys, son, ask your parent. If you want to have authorities over the aviation or anything else federal government, ask the parents. Propose an amendment, get 3/4 of them to ratify it. Aviation is one of those things that should have gone through that process, and it never did. Oh, there's a whole list of them. For you libertarians out there now, you ready to get excited? There's also no authority for the federal government regarding drugs. So guess what? Whenever the federal government, the DEA was shutting down those dispensaries in California, remember when that junk was going on? That's right. I was arguing that it was unconstitutional for them to be doing that. Not necessarily because I was very excited about any legalization of any particular drug such as marijuana, but because the federal government doesn't have that authority. It's none of their business. It's up to each state. If they want that authority, they need to pass an amendment. They had enough sense to pass an amendment for alcohol, for prohibition. They knew they didn't have authority over that. So how is it they didn't realize it when it comes to drugs or aviation? Or could it be they just decided to take it upon themselves and didn't think anybody would challenge them anyway? Which also begins then a process in which they get used to just taking power. And then you get to the point where you don't mind because it's happened so often, it's precedent. So why fight it, right? They're supposed to be asking for any and every authority, even if it's an obvious one. And the amendment process is that permission asking method, if that makes sense. All right, so we've got, go ahead.
Okay, so this is actually a question from me. So if and I don't know if this is the proper time or place, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So if the Constitution with the amendments are supposed to be the law, where does the U.S. Code come in?
The U.S. Code is supposed to carry out what is in the Constitution. If the U.S. Code conflicts or contradicts the Constitution, then it's unconstitutional law.
Because I see a lot of legislation is done, or a lot of code is written in the U.S. Code or put into the U.S. Code that is not necessarily constitutional. and they don't even pay attention to the Constitution. They just put it into the code and believe that the code supersedes the Constitution when it should be the reverse. Yes.
Right, exactly. Well, not only that, but they'll tell you it actually is constitutional what they're putting in the code. But see, what the Constitution they're following is not this document. It's what judges have said or what politicians have said. I'll give you a great example. Birthright citizenship. Everybody just knows that's the law. It's in the U.S. Code, birthright citizenship. And it's supported by the United States versus ARC. I can't remember the other two names, but the last name is ARC in the case in the 1890s. And what birthright citizenship basically says is if you're born in American soil, you're automatically a citizen. So, you slide under the fence, you're waving the Mexican flag, but you pop out a baby on American soil. Guess what? Kid's an American. We're not going to kick you out because, your kid's an American. Or, you get birthed in, say, Oakland, California to two students who so happen to be visiting. Not that I'm mentioning names, Kamala Harris. She just saw automatically not only a citizen, but she's a natural born citizen because she was born in Oakland. But that's not what it says. So the problem there is not amendment or lack thereof, it's interpretation. And the problem is the U.S. Code is full of faulty interpretation, and nobody has challenged it enough to get it removed. And we've got a court system that's not willing to either hear the cases or agree with the Constitution anyway.
I have a question from Bill. Now I'm going to ask his first question. His first question is can't amendments hurt us as far as the First and Second or even Fourth Amendment? I asked for some clarification, and he says, for example, permits for guns, limiting rounds, as in most states, illegal search and seizure like PCR testing, taking down or taking DNA without a warrant, or limiting speech and censorship.
Okay, so is he saying that the amendment hurt or the lack of following it is hurting?
And I'm not sure. I wanted to ask you what, based on what he said, so that you can ask for some.
Well, they're violating the Constitution at the federal level with all of those things, and it does hurt us. And they shouldn't be violating the Constitution. But here's the problem: tyrants act tyrannically, usurpers usurp, criminals act criminally. In other words, I'm not giving them a pass. I'm saying this is what they do. It's like, it's like the old joke about the frog and the scorpion, and the scorpion wants to get a ride across the river. And the frog says, no, because you'll sting me. And the scorpion says, no, I need the ride. I won't sting you. So the scorpion jumps on the frog's back. They get halfway across the river and the scorpion stings him. The frog says, hey, you said you weren't going to sting me. What was that for? He says, I'm a scorpion. That's what I do. I sting. Mm-hmm. All right. The same thing with these anti-constitutional leftist nut jobs. That's what they do. So then the question is, well, how do they get away with it? We let them. We got to find a way to stop them. Quit putting them in the office. Start fighting back in the ways that we can fight back. And we feel like it's difficult because it's like we're the opposing team in their stadium with their referees, with their crowd, with their commentators, and you get your first down and the referee walks up, taps you on the shoulder, says, well, sorry to say this, but 30 seconds ago, we changed the rule. You now need 15 yards. So you didn't get your first down. And by the way, the goalpost is now in the corner. I mean, and that's that. And so you feel like, how do we pull this off? It's impossible. It's not impossible. There are ways.
Well, I think the vast majority of people, you talked about how in California, only 25% of gun owners vote. And that's because they feel as though the rationale there is that they feel as though their vote doesn't really count. So why even bother going to do it?
Well, either their vote doesn't count or the opposing party's not exactly putting up something worth voting for anyway.
Sure.
I mean, we've got a recall election. We're all excited about getting rid of Newsom, but yet the best thing that the GOP can put out is, Bruce Jenner with boobs. He's now that person has the best platform. Are you kidding me? So, and so people go, well, why even vote? Either I got the idiot or the idiot. I mean,
Well, but I think that's part of what you're talking about. The situation is so hopeless. People don't vote because they feel it's a charade at this point.
But voting's only a part of it. There's so
right.
much more.
Yeah.
There's so much more. How about getting involved in precincts as precinct captains? How about writing letter campaigns to certain people? How about affidavits? How about a common law grand jury that can send out indictments to arrest some of these knuckleheads if you can find a constitutional sheriff to carry it out? There are options.
Okay.
Now, that said, an Article 5 convention is possibly one of those options when it comes to getting control of things. And the other thing we have to remember is this. While this is a federal constitution and we talk about the federal government a lot, it all begins locally. When was the last time you went to a city council meeting? When was the last time you went to a school board meeting? When was the last time you went to a water board meeting? Even something as mundane as that requires your presence, because those politicians are the people in Sacramento or Salem or whatever state it is that you're in, and then Washington, D.C. after that. So let's, and now, we get to the fun part. All the cockroaches in Washington, quit breeding them locally.
So Colt is asking, what does a precinct captain do?
Precinct captain is involved with a number of things, getting out the vote and all that, but also they're part of the leadership that chooses who our candidates are going to be. That's what the Central Committee does too. I
don't really like the term Central Committee, but
that's what that's the term. But you know what, the Central Committee, be involved with the Central Committee and precinct captain, things like that, because those are the people who are choosing the leadership of whatever party you're part of at the local level. Mm-hmm. That's where the rubber hits the pavement when it comes to your local stuff, is with that group. And most of these precinct captain spots and most of these Central Committee spots, a lot of them, there's nobody running. They're empty.
Right. And that was the point I was going to make. The thing is that the local government is being, no, conservatives aren't running for those positions. Those are predominantly occupied by people of Marxist nature or with right. Marxist philosophy. And they are the ones that are implementing all of the nasty agenda, right. call it 2-1 for, you know what I'm talking about. Or 2050 or whatever, but they're the ones that are implementing that Marxist agenda, and they're essentially implementing it without any resistance, because the conservatives aren't engaged at the local level. We're focused on the president or the
right. We need to be focused across the board. And while I have never been on the Central Committee, I attend until my classes started interfering lately. I was attending every Central Committee meeting. It's only been the last 6 months that I haven't been. That's only because I have a class that's at the same time. But I have the treasurer of my nonprofit. he actually is on the Central Committee, goes to every meeting, and then he and I actually talk about it afterwards. And so I get my voice now through him. But for City Council, I remember when I was once again, now I've got a class on the same time as the City Council meeting, so I can't do that anymore. But when I was attending this City Council meetings every 2 weeks, I loved it, because there was a handful of City Council members that when I walked in, they would do this. You know, they look up to the sky and shake their head. Oh, dang it, that guy's here.
Right.
Because I always made sure I not only got my 3 minutes, I always went beyond the 3 minutes, and I always said stuff that really made an impact. It was funny too, because one time there was a great teachable moment for some youngsters. A class was there with their teacher, and this is long before the grocery bag thing in California became what it is. This one of the students did their 3 minutes about convincing the Murrieta City Council to be the lead city to outlaw these flimsy grocery bags and only allow reusable, to be the city to lead the way in this very important issue. I just so happened to be the next person to speak. And my speech was going to be about something totally different, but I could not pass up this opportunity. So I got up there and I said, well, I appreciate the young person's desire to make the world a better place. Let's take into consideration part of her argument about the reusable bags and why it's actually a bad idea, and they're actually more dangerous. And I start talking about, how, because you reuse them, if food gets in the bottom and create, illness, hazardous environment. The thicker plastic bags that they're using to replace the flimsy bags actually take 28 times the energy to create. So they actually are not environmentally conscious, and so on and so forth. And I go through this whole thing in 3 minutes, and I'm facing the city council. The girls are behind me, and a friend of mine, a guy named Harry Ramos, is a city council member at the time, and he walks up to me after the meeting. He says, "You're a horrible, horrible person." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, when you shot down that little girl's idea about the grocery bags, she was crying." And I said, "No, that means I'm a good person, because she got a shock of reality. That number one, people are going to disagree with you. And number two, what you think is rosy might not be so rosy after all." I'm glad she got that opportunity to get smacked upside the head by some words. That's what we need, more of that. And that's the reason why I say be involved, because you might not even run for something. Just showing up and you catch something like that and you get up there and you do your 3 minutes, you may change the course of somebody's life with what you had to say. You don't know. But we got to be going to these meetings. We got to be involved, and a lot of it begins locally. And that's the beginning of turning this around. I know we feel like we're overwhelmed and it's not possible. I'm here to tell you, enough of us start doing this, it'll start turning around. Now, that said, our problem is an aircraft carrier. It's not going to make a fast U-turn, but it can make the U-turn.
So Colt has an idea. He says, can we have a show at a future date where you go over, or where you help go over all the ways that you can help, or that you can get involved locally? And I that's probably a good idea.
It's not a bad idea. I'd like to wait until after we get to the end of the Constitution, and then we could do something like that before we start over. Right. Because when we get the Constitution, we'll probably start over again, so people get a second dose or whatever. And other shows like that, because when I get to the end of the Constitution, you don't think I'm just going to vanish, do you?
No,
I'm going to hang around, right? So we might as well do shows like that, because I want you to be informed. I want you to know how to do something, because I'll tell you what, you can learn all you want, and it's going to make you angry. But what are you going to do with it? And do you know how to do what you need to do with it? And so I agree. I agree, Paul, 100%. Let's do that. I'll make a note that to request that later on, among other shows. And don't forget. If I forget, remind me. But because because as I get older, I'm battling with CRS. CRS can't remember shit.
Well, understood. Let's get back to Article 5.
Yeah, everybody my age and older is going, don't talk about CRS. All right, we're all suffering with it, okay? All right, now we've talked about amendments, what amendments can be made, how it's going to be made, all that jazz. But then Article 5 has an interesting section. And this next part is very interesting indeed, and it's going to enlighten you on a few things. It is a section that says what amendments are not allowed. So after it says, after it gives Congress the authority to decide the mode of ratification, then it says this, after a semicolon, about 6-7 lines up in your pocket Constitution from the bottom of Article 5, provided that no amendment, okay, so that means no amendments that are not allowed, which may be made prior to the year 1808 shall in any manner affect the first and fourth clauses of the 9th section of the first article. Article 1, Section 9, Clause 1, Clause 4. All right, so real quick, I'll go over to Article 1, Section 9, Clause 1 and Clause 4 to show you what they don't want that they couldn't do. Article 1, Section 9, Clause 1, the migration or importation of such persons as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit shall not be prohibited by the Congress prior to the year 1808. That's where that 1808 thing came from. Article 5 is that right there. In other words, no amendment could change that. And what that was the ability for, number one, as of 1808, Congress to have the authority over immigration. And the other one was over the Atlantic slave trade. And that Congress could outlaw the Atlantic slave trade as of 1808. This was a reminder in Article 5. By the way, don't touch that one. It's important. We're not going to allow you to pass any amendment to disallow Congress's opportunity to outlaw the Atlantic slave trade. Boy, this is quite the pro-slavery. I mean, wait a second. Outlaw the Atlantic slave trade? It's not very pro-slavery at all, is it? All right. Matter of fact, you and I had a discussion about that earlier, so it's funny that came up. So they're saying in Article 5, don't touch that one. It's important. We want to make sure Congress outlaws the Atlantic slave trade. No amendments allowed to reverse that. Then it says the fourth clause. Okay, so that's the first clause. 2, 3, 4. No capitation or other direct tax shall be laid unless in proportion to the census or enumeration herein before directed to be taken. If no amendment can be made regarding that clause, why do we have the 16th Amendment and the allowance for them to directly tax us? Is that not a violation? Now, people say, yeah, but it said prior to 1808. Well, no, that was applying to the first clause because 1808 was in that clause. This one doesn't have that year. I'm a firm believer the 16th Amendment is totally unconstitutional because of that. That's just me. But it gets better.
I'm a firm believer it was never fully ratified, but
well, I'm a firm believer of that too. 3 states actually broke their own rules to get it ratified, so those ratification votes didn't count.
Right.
Yeah, 17th Amendment, same thing.
Exactly.
But the Secretary of State deemed it ratified. Must be related to Pelosi in some way. You know the name of the Secretary of State at the time?
No.
Philander Knox.
No, yeah, Philander Knox, yes.
You think the word philanderer comes from that knucklehead?
Maybe.
Anyway, all right, now for the next part of Article 5 here. Then it says, and that no state without its consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. That challenges the 17th Amendment. Funny how the 16th and 17th Amendment back to back here warned against, and we did it anyway. 17th Amendment is an interesting amendment because what it did was it changed how senators enter office in the U.S. Senate. Originally, the senators were voted in, let me rephrase that, appointed by the state legislatures. State legislatures chose the U.S. senators for the state. It was a way for the state to have oversight over the federal government by having their own people in the U.S. Senate. The founders did not want that changed. In fact, in Article 1, Section 4, let me flash over there real quick. If you want to, you can. You don't have to follow me over there. Article 1, Section 4, it talks about elections. And here's what it says. The times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. But Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations, except as to the places of choosing senators. It's warning Congress saying you can, when it comes to elections, you can be involved if you feel you have to when it comes to senators and representatives, not presidents. That's beside the point. Except when it comes to the place of choosing senators. You can't touch that. And what's the place of choosing senators? State legislatures choosing the senators. So first of all, 17th Amendment violates that. Then on top of that, they say that no state without a consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. So in other words, what it's saying is the 17th Amendment actually is possible from a constitutional standpoint had the states have done it. The states could have proposed that amendment. Congress couldn't. I just told you why Congress can't. And they did. And also, any state that did not ratify it, they're not supposed to lose their suffrage in the Senate without their consent. If they didn't ratify it, they didn't give their consent. Now, someone says, well, Doug, the states didn't lose their equal suffrage. It's still 2 per state. That's not what I'm referring to. It's the word suffrage. What does the word suffrage mean? It is representation. It is voice. Whose suffrage are we talking about? It says that no state without its consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. When the Constitution says the state or a state, it means the state legislatures. If it means the citizens of a state, it'll say citizens of a state. I'll give you an example. In Article 3, and I brought this up, I think, when we were in Article 3, in the first tail end of the very first paragraph of Section 2 in Article 3, it gives a list of cases in which the federal courts can take. It says between a state and citizens of another state, between citizens of different states, between citizens of the same state, claiming lands under grants in different states, and between a state or the citizens thereof and foreign states, citizens and subjects. Is it not, do you not see that it says, or the citizens thereof? You have the state, and then you have the citizens of the state. When the Constitution says the state, it means the state legislatures. If it means citizens of the state or voters of the state, it will say so. So now we'll go back to Article 5. No state without its consent, the state's consent, shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. The suffrage of the states that did not ratify the 17th Amendment were taken away from them without their consent. The state legislatures are no longer appointing those senators, and that suffrage could not be taken away without their consent. If they did not ratify the amendment, they should not have to follow that amendment. And here's where it gets even more interesting. There were 9 states that never ratified the 17th Amendment. Originally, it was not properly ratified. However, later on, other states began to ratify it, and then finally it was. At the time, though, it was not properly ratified. 9 states never ratified it. 2 of them weren't states yet and just never got around to doing it, Hawaii and Alaska. 6 of the states from the South, the farthest north one being Virginia, just never ratified it. But 1 state said no. Outright no, we want nothing to do with it. We think it's wrong. Our vote is no. That state was Utah. Now, Utah not only lost its suffrage without its consent, it lost its suffrage against its consent. They outright said no. So now I'm going to let you guys in on something I'm working on with my friend, with a bunch of my friends in my Constitution Association group. In the Constitution Association, one of the things that we're working on is to bring this to the attention of the Utah legislature. We're going to talk to legislators from the Utah legislature and tell them, hey, your state lost its suffrage in the U.S. Senate against your consent. And you have a legal footing, a legal argument saying that you don't have to follow it anymore. So we're going to suggest that you yank your existing senators, which they probably won't have too much of a problem with considering it's Mitt Romney and Mike Lee, and then appoint new ones. We want you to follow the way it was before the 17th Amendment, and we want you to tell the federal government and everybody else, this is the way we're going to do it from now on, because we're not going to lose our suffrage without our consent. We're going to go back to the old way.
Does the state have the right to pull its senators?
Absolutely.
I did not know that.
So now,
that's interesting. I got a question here. Are state constitutions supposed to follow the Constitution?
State constitutions are for state issues. Federal constitutions for federal issues. So people get confused because they think. Go ahead.
The question here is, does the state can the state constitution violate the U.S. Constitution? I think that's the premise of his question.
Right, and I understand what they mean by that, because some people think that certain things in the state constitution is a violation when it isn't. So the federal constitution is for the federal government, state constitution is for the state government. The state constitution cannot be contrary to the federal constitution when it comes to what's authorized to the states. For example, states are not allowed to print money. A state constitution cannot decide, hey, we're going to have a constitutional amendment allowing us to print money. No, because it says in the Constitution, you can't print money. But I think where some people get confused is something like the Second Amendment. Second Amendment applies to the federal government, not to the states. Don't get nervous. I'm not saying the states can stomp all over gun rights, because you have that right, not because of the Constitution, but because God gave it to you. But the way it was originally intended was shall not be infringed. Every single federal gun law is unconstitutional. The states are allowed to make gun laws, but they're not supposed to go beyond a point where it's interfering with your right to keep and bear arms. So they're supposed to be necessary gun laws. It's like the gun law that says, someone asked me one time, says, well, Doug, you say shall not be infringed. So you think people should be able to own nuclear weapons? I said, no, but the federal government can't make that law, but the state can. I appreciate the fact there's a state law that doesn't allow my 8-year-old granddaughter to go buy a gun at a gun shop, but it has to be the state that makes that law. Federal government doesn't have that authority. So now the question is, well, isn't constitutional items in a state constitution that allows the state government to make gun laws a violation of the Second Amendment? No, because the Second Amendment applies to the federal government. That's where people get confused, because they think, no, it's violating the Second Amendment because the state can't do that because of the Second Amendment. Second Amendment has nothing to do with the states. It's all about the federal government. Now, there is, if you want to look it up, a doctrine that the left has bought into, and actually most people bought into, called the incorporation of the Bill of Rights to the states. That doctrine emerged after the war between the states. Even your most leftist historian will admit that the Bill of Rights was originally written only to the federal government, but they contend that the 14th Amendment changed it so that they are applied to the states as well. Well, if that was the case, then shall not be infringed would mean shall not be infringed, and no state law regarding guns would be constitutional at all either. There would be no allowance of any gun laws at the federal or state level. And the question is, do you like having at least a couple of those gun laws, like 8-year-olds can't buy guns? Somebody's got to make those laws, and it's not the federal government that can do it. Now, getting back to the original question, though, so yes, you're right. State constitutions are not supposed to violate or contradict the federal constitution, but we have to make sure we understand what those are. Sometimes we think something's a contradiction when it's not. Now, that said, state laws can't contradict the federal constitution either. And
I'm getting a few questions because you hit on the second.
Okay, yeah. How dare I bring up guns in a gun proud group?
But so I'm going to propose, and I'm going to propose this, that when you do the Second Amendment, because I think there's going to be a lot,
which is in about 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
I'm going to propose that you do that in 2 weeks. And spread out over 2 weeks, because so many people are going to have questions about that.
Okay, we can do that.
Yeah, I just think that might be a better.
Yeah, let's hold up. I mentioned the Second Amendment because of the question, but yeah, I don't want to get into it per se right now, but we will go over it because Article 6 and Article 7 next week, then introduction of the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment the next week, then the week after that, Second Amendment.
Yeah.
So we've got Article 6, Article 7 next week. First Amendment, introduction to the preamble to the Bill of Rights. The week after that, Second Amendment after that. Everybody got your schedule down? Okay.
I think, that's a great idea. You know what I think we should do is, I think we should make that schedule, create that schedule, put it on the website so that everybody can see it.
Hey man, this is when Doug's talking about the Second Amendment, and we're welcoming all the questions you can throw at him.
Exactly. Because I think I think we'd have a lot more live participants on that class. All right. Yeah, absolutely. Put it out there that so not this week, not the week after that, the week after that. So 3 Tuesdays from now, we will discuss the Second Amendment, and the question line will be live, because that amendment can be explained in about 20 minutes, 15 minutes. And then the rest of the show, and maybe the next show, will be your questions. Let's have an open discussion. For sure. Absolutely. And the Second Amendment has a very interesting foundation that it comes from, which we'll get into also on that day. Can't spoil it now, guys. Come on, then you wouldn't come back later to listen, right? Can't give you the end of the story ahead of time. I'd ruin the movie. All right, but yeah, we'll talk about the Second Amendment in a few weeks. All right, so Article 5, at the very end, once again, disallows the 17th Amendment, or at least disallows states to lose their suffrage. Article 1, Section 4 disallows the 17th Amendment. Article 5 disallows the 17th Amendment in the sense of states losing their suffrage without their consent. Hey, do you think the Founding Fathers realized that something like the 17th Amendment might be on the horizon? Absolutely. They saw all of this coming. And I want to add to this, because we got like 7 minutes, and I want to add to this real quick. I don't believe that the Founding Fathers were demigods or these perfect human beings. Like you and I, they were flawed people. But you know what?
They were brilliant, flawed people. And the document they put together is damn near perfect. And they saw things that they shouldn't have in their time, but they knew it was coming. 17th Amendment, they warn against it twice in the Constitution. And the 17th Amendment didn't come along for another 130 something years, 126 years. You know, they saw these things ahead of time. You know why? Because regardless of technology, regardless of everything, liberty and tyranny always stays the same. Liberty and tyranny never changes, and how to combat it never changes. The technology and the names of the people may be different, but the systems are the same. Well, Doug, they didn't know about Marxism. They didn't. They called it utopianism, communitarianism, and communalism. Well, yeah, but Doug, what about the redistribution of wealth? Well, Samuel Adams called it the schemes of leveling. They knew about this stuff. They wrote this Constitution to protect us against socialism, to protect us against utopianism, communism, whatever else you want to call it. It was written to protect us against all this stuff that's going on. Then why is this stuff going on if the Constitution is so wonderful? Because we're not following it. It gets back to the recipe thing, which you've heard me tell before, but I'm going to do it one more time for those new people. My dad's got this great salsa recipe. One time his sister says, hey, Jerry, I heard you got a great salsa recipe. Can you send it to me? No problem. He sent it to her. She sent it out to other family members. And by the time I got down to one of our nephews in Arkansas, he got a hold of Dad and said, you know what? Your salsa recipe sucks. Well, what'd you put in it? Well, instead of garlic, he put garlic powder. Instead of lime juice, he put lemon juice. Instead of Roma tomatoes, he used those round steak tomatoes. And when he came across cilantro, well, he's from Arkansas. He didn't know what cilantro was. So he looked it up online and it said Mexican parsley. So he put parsley in it. Of course it sucked. He wasn't following the recipe. Of course we're in trouble. We're not following the recipe. The original Constitution has been forgotten. We're not following the original recipe. We're not following that original language. No wonder we're in trouble. No wonder this garbage going on. And there's all kinds of side stories too, which I don't want to get into, that are also going on. But those things also are going on because we've left the original intent. No matter what you believe, what theory you believe in, what avenue you think we've taken, and where we're at, ultimately, all of it comes down to the same thing. We got to get back to the original intent of the Constitution. And it all goes away. And they knew that this stuff wasn't going to go on, and they wrote it in the recipe, and the recipe was a good one. We haven't been following the recipe, and that's why we're in trouble. Hopefully that clarifies a lot for you. Next week, Article 6, which includes the Supremacy Clause. You've heard of that, right? Oh, boy, that's a good conversation, too, because I'm going to tell you things that is going to completely make your heads explode. Well, we do that every week, don't we? There's the heads exploding all over the place. What a mess I make.
I mean, if you really want to get into head explosion, you could talk about the missing 13th Amendment.
Oh, boy. Don't tempt me. No, you know what? Actually, I will be talking about that eventually, but I won't get into it just yet. But yeah, the missing 13th Amendment.
Why don't you tease it? We have a few minutes. Why don't you tease it?
Well, and actually, I've mentioned it before on the show, but I haven't gone details into it. Original 13th Amendment, we didn't even know about it until 1983.
Right.
And we discovered this missing 13th Amendment that existed between the 1820s, 1819, if you want to get specific on the ratification date, and the war between the states. And then it suddenly vanished. And I'm not, without getting into detail, I will say this. The Bar Association would not exist if the original 13th Amendment was in play.
Interesting. I did not know that.
And by the way, it disappeared right before the American bar joined the bar that we are now. What is the Bar Association, folks? What does the BAR stand for? British Accreditation Registry. Just a thought. And it would not exist. Oh, yeah, we'll talk about original 13th Amendment down the road. I tend to talk about it between the 12th and 13th Amendment. What a surprise. Because when I mentioned the existing 13th, then I say, there used to be another one. So that's usually when I get into it. But do your research, check it out. It is online. There's information about the missing 13th. I'm
Right.
glad I'm not around for those head explosions, because that's going to be a mess.
Right.
But thanks for bringing it up.
Yeah.
I tell you what, folks, there's stuff out there we don't even realize sometimes. It's a mess. And we need you to understand this document, and we need you to be active.
Amen.
Get involved locally. Do what you can, because it's so important. Our republic depends on you. All of us. We're in this together, as they like to say on the left. Well, then let's act like it. Because you know what? Here's the problem. They're naturally hive-minded. We don't work well together as we should, as well as we should. We don't play real well with others like we should. But we need to learn to. Because while we are individualistic, we are independent minded. The fact is, the enemy has been ripping us a new one, and it's partly because we don't play well with others. We need to play well with others. We need to work together, because that's the only way we can fight these guys. The colonies knew it. That's why they united into a union. That was the only way they could beat the British.
Right. Exactly. On that note, well, it's 3:59 by my clock, so we're right on the tail end. We'll end it there. We will be back next week, this time at 3 p.m. Pacific. I may be a little out of it. I'm having a procedure done that morning, so I may be a little out of it, but I will be here, Lord willing.
Lord willing. Love you all. Thank you for being a part of what I do. ConstitutionSpeaker@yahoo.com if you want to shoot me a line. DouglasVGibbs.com, politicalpistachio.com. Thanks. You know what? I tell you, you're an awesome audience. I try to answer all the emails, and thank you for you dropping the line. I really do appreciate the love.